In this section 7.3, we're going to continue solving systems of equations, except this time we're going to be dealing with matrices. You might have noticed we skipped section 7.2, and yes, we did. So we're just skipping that and going straight into 7.3. Okay, first we need to talk about what a matrix is. Matrix is just a rectangular array of numbers. So it's numbers that are put in a particular order, okay? So the dimensions is actually the order of the matrix. The dimensions or the order of a matrix is the number of rows times the number of columns. So it's, here's my rows. So there's two of those, and then I have three columns. So this is a 2 by 3 matrix. It's very important that you don't get those confused because you're going to be communicating these matrices to your calculator. So you have to tell the calculator what the dimension is so that you can then enter it in your calculator. Okay, a square matrix is probably what it sounds like. It has the same number of rows and columns. So it's got 2 rows and it's got 2 columns. So it's, makes a square. So this one is a 2 by 2 square matrix. This one, notice it's a 3 by 3 square matrix. Then there's one other type of matrix. It's called an augmented matrix, and that's what we're going to be using the most when we're putting stuff in our calculator, because we're basically going to transfer this information into my calculator by putting it into this augmented matrix, okay? So when you're looking at an augmented matrix, this is going to be your X column, here's your Y column, and here's your Z column. And then a lot of times I call that my answers column, but that's not really accurate. It's not really answers. I guess I should call it my constant. It's where you put the constant number, the plain old number, okay? Usually they're X and Y's and Z's, but occasionally you'll see books and they'll use A's and B's and C's, and that's okay. It's just in alphabetical order, okay? So I'm going to write in example number 1, I'm going to write that first matrix in that first system of equations in an augmented matrix. So I'm going to have my X column, my Y column, my Z column, and my constant column. So I'll have 4x and then minus 2y, but notice I don't need the x, so I'll leave that off. And then 3z's, and then my constant is a 4. So then I have 3x, 5y, 1z, and my 7 is a constant, and then a 5, a -1, notice it doesn't have anything there, so it's an understood 1, and a +4 and a 7, and I put a dotted line there, or dashed line, that basically separates where the variables were and where the constants are, okay? We can do the same thing for the next system. Notice the next system isn't quite as large. You only have X's and Y's. You have you don't have any Z's. So we'll have an X, a Y, and a constant column. So I'll have my 2X, my 7Y, and my 1 constant. I have 5X. Now, how many Y's do I have? I don't have any, so I've got to put a 0 there. So that's my augmented matrix for that one. And then this one, it looks small, but notice how many variables you have. You have X's, you have Y's, you have Z's. So it's just as big as A that we did over here. It's going to have just as many numbers in my matrix. So I have 1X, I don't have any Y's, any Z's, and then I have my C. I don't have any X's in this one. There's no X's over there, so I'm going to put 0, and then I have 1 Y, 2 Z's, and a 2. And lastly, I have 1 X. I don't have any Y's, -3 for my Z, and my 6. So it's just as big as A, but we just have a lot of zeros in there, right? All right. So now we're going to basically go backwards. We're going to write the system of equations for the following augmented matrices. So once again, we have x, y, and z, and this is my constant. So I'll have x plus 2y plus 3z is 9. I'll have my 2x's, and then my y's and my z's. I have 3x's. I don't have any y's, and I have 3. Now, I could have moved this over here if I wanted to, but I like to keep them lined up. But you don't have to do that. Let's do this last one. I have x, and that's it. So x equals 2. I have, remember, this is my x and y and z. I've got a y, and that's -1. Then I have a z, and that's 3. All right. So now let me introduce you to row echelon form. The one below that, this right here, is in row echelon form. I want you to notice a couple of things. First, notice the diagonal. Here's your diagonal. What is on the diagonal? You always have 1 on the diagonal. What is underneath the diagonal? You're always going to have zeros underneath. And then above the diagonal, you can have any number. So any number is above the diagonal. But the main thing is you have zeros on the diagonal. Ones on the diagonal and zeros underneath. So when something is in row echelon form, we can then back substitute to actually solve that matrix. So let's do that. You don't need any calculator for that. First thing you need to know, you need to set up your equations. There's your x and y, there's your constant. So this will be x minus y equals 2. And the next one is just y equals 0. So notice I have an answer. I know what remember my answer is going to be a point, okay, because it's a system of equations. So I already know what y is, so I just need to take that and plug it in, back substitute. So x minus my y, which was 0, is equal to 2. So that means my x is 2. So there's my solution, 2, 0. Now this one is a little trickier because it's a 3. It's got x, y, and a z. So the first one is x minus 2y plus z equals 0. And then you'll have y minus 3z equals 1. And finally, z equals 2. Okay, but the cool thing is you've already been given an answer. So I'm just going to back substitute. I'm going to stick that 2 right there. So I now have y minus 3 times something is 1. We knew that z is going to be 2, so I'm going to plug it in. And then I just solve it. Y minus 6 is 1, so my y value is 7. And then I'm going to back substitute into this one. I've got x minus 2y plus z equals 0. I know what let me make it green. I know what my z is, and I know my y is. So I'm going to plug those in. X minus 2 times something plus something equals 0. So I'm going to plug in my 2 in for my z, my 7 in for my y. So I know x minus 12 is 0, so my x has to be 12. So I need to write my answer as we normally write it as ordered pairs, but it's called an ordered triple, and you just put it in alphabetical order. So you've got a 12, you've got a 7, and you've got a 2. So that is your solution to that system. All right, so notice that we have another type of row echelon form. This one is actually called reduced row echelon form. Notice that what is on the diagonal is the same as it was before. It's a 1. Notice what's under it, the zeros, which is the same as before, but notice what is above it. I've got zeros above it. So zeros are above and below the diagonal. Now, we actually had one like that. Let me go back up to it. This one right here was in reduced row echelon form. Notice that I've got ones on my diagonal. I've got zeros below and zeros above. Now look when I wrote out the system, notice that was my answers. Told me what the answers were. So if you have something in reduced row echelon form, you've got the answer because um, in this one I know that my x is 2, my y is -1, my z is 3. Wouldn't it be great if our calculators could just we put the system in, we enter um, this in our calculator and then tell it to put it in reduced row echelon form and it solves it for us? Well, it can. So this is how you do it, okay? So first you have to write the system as an augmented matrix. So that's what we're going to start doing. We're going to write in example number 4, I'm going to write it as an augmented matrix. So I'll have my x and my y and my constant. So I have a 1, a 2, and a 5. And then I have a 2, a 1, and a -2. So we need to enter that into our calculator. Now, I would go through that, but I've decided that it's best for you to use YouTube instead of me making a YouTube, mainly because it's hard for me to show you my calculator on this. I could show it to you um, on an app, but why reinvent the wheel? So all you're going to do is enter that into your calculator and then go to the calculate part and tell it reduced row echelon form. And when you do that, it's going to actually spit out this. It will give you that in reduced row echelon form, and that just means that your x is -3, your y is 4, and you write -3 and 4. You've got your answer. You're going to do the same thing here. You're going to put B in a matrix form. So you'll have your X, your Y, your Z in your constant column. So we'll have 4, 2, -3, and 6, 1, -4, 1, and -4. And then notice this one is an X. So I'll have -1. I don't have a Y. There's my Z, and there's my 2. So I've put it in augmented matrix form. Then you're going to stick that in your calculator. Notice this is a 3 by 4. So you'll put it in 3 by 4. Enter it in your calculator and then tell the calculator to put it in reduced row echelon form. That YouTube link right here will show you exactly how to do that. And the calculator will give you this back. That's a 2. That's a 2. And that's a 2. So my X is 2, my Y is 2, and my Z is 2. But you need to practice what YouTube shows you, okay? So you need to practice putting these in your calculator. It does take practice, so you need to put several of these in and then do the same thing with your homework. Put it in, go and do some odds and put it in because the odds have the answer in the back of the book. Okay, and that's it for section 7.3. It's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple section, but you do need to get really good at using your calculator.